Well, good morning, Jim. It's been a while. We've known each other professionally for over 35 years. We've lived through a number of distinct health and social service reforms ever since the legislative guarantees to English language services were introduced in legislation back in 1986. Where are we now, do you think?
Well, first of all, yes, we've been in business with reforms of the health system for all that time, and I was able to count at least six major overhauls of the health system since the early 90s. I think you and I have been involved in one way or another with all of them. But I think what's interesting now to take a look at is where are we in relation to the last major reform, which occurred in 2015 with what is affectionately or not affectionately called Bill 10.
And now, of course, we're looking at Bill 15, an act to make the health and social service system more effective. A new piece of legislation tabled by the minister in March of this year, over 300 pages long, 1,200 articles, modifying 36 laws. How do we see that having an effect on where we are now?
Well, this has to do with the impact on what we call the legislative guarantees of services in English. And really, there are sort of three provisions that we should take a look at. The first is the general entitlement, in which English-speaking persons have the right to receive services in English, given the resources of the institutions, and also to the extent that there is an access program that defines that entitlement. And along with that, supporting that entitlement, are two major features. First of all, it's the access program, within which the services are identified and where they're accessible in English. And it's the representation of English-speaking communities with the institutions that create them, what we call regional access committees. So those three provisions together are impacted by Bill 15. But I think, Richard, it might be useful for everyone to be aware of what did we gain in Bill 10 that we considered to be for the communities very crucial gains in the streamlining of the system back in 2015 that are specifically affected by Bill 15.
So we know, of course, now the major change introduced by Bill 15 is the creation of Santé Quebec. It's essentially a big crown corporation, which has the responsibility of coordinating service delivery in all realms of health and social services in Quebec. And Santé Quebec will be distinct from the Ministry of Health and Social Services, whose responsibilities will be mainly focused on developing priorities and orientations for the ministry. And Santé Quebec also has the responsibility or the possibility to create institutions within itself, each of whom will be governed and directed by a director and council, institutional council, which seems to resemble a board of directors, but is another name. So given that these new structures will be in place if the bill is adopted as is, what would be the implications on the access plans and the regional committees?
Okay, so let's take a look at what we got in Bill 10, which is impacted by Bill 15. So back in the last attempt to streamline the health system, there was one very, very important change that was made. We know that up to that point, an access program identifying services was developed by the regional planning authorities and not the institutions themselves. So these agents were removed in Bill 10. So what we gained was that the access program became attached to the institution that actually has to deliver the services. So this was a really important gain for us. It's logical that an access program be developed by the institution that delivers the services. The other thing we got in Bill 10 was that regional access committees were defined as 100% representatives of the English-speaking communities being served by the institution. So this was a major gain, and not only that, but the law recognized that the community organizations of the English-speaking community would be the organizations that would identify the candidates who would comprise the committee. So those were two major steps forward out of Bill 10 that we have been working with since then. And there's been a very, very important relationship that's developed between the institution, the access program, and the English-speaking communities that are served by it since that time. What Bill 15 does, it's a bill that streamlines to the extent that it removes a number of the details that we got in 2015 from the law. So Santé Quebec obviously gets rid of all the board of directors. All the institutions will be amalgamated under Santé Quebec with one board of directors governing the entire health system. So in doing so, Santé Quebec now will develop one access program for the entire English-speaking population of Quebec. So obviously this is a huge change. And then, of course, the second major change is that the regional access committees are no longer in law advising the institution. So they'll all be gathered up and they will be advising Santé Quebec on the access program. And what does that mean? Well, it means also part of the streamlining is all the provisions that identified who could be on a regional access committee have been removed from the law, those gains that we made in 2015. And Santé Quebec will now devise, new provisions that will identify who can sit on a regional access committee that will advise Santé Quebec. So those are the two major impacts.
So this looks like a move to centralize the application of the legislative guarantees to English language services, which do, as you mentioned, remain in the law. What are the implications you think exist for the community with the new model proposed by Bill 10? Bill 15?
Okay. Well, I think, it's important to state that even though Santé Quebec will devise one access program for the English-speaking population, it will do that in collaboration with the institutions. But the problem is it doesn't spell out exactly what that means. And this is where streamlining legislation actually works against us, because we literally don't know how Santé Quebec will develop an access program that reflects the specificities of regions and the needs of specific English-speaking communities. I guess the key here is to look at how we can reestablish or rebuild into Bill 15 some of the detail that was lost, due to this reform.
We know that Quebec only recently approved a round of access programs to English language services. Programs were approved for a period of 3 years, the end of May this year. What are the implications of the new legislation on the programs that were recently adopted?
Well, I think it's important to note that although access programs have to be renewed every 5 years, these access programs have been renewed for only 3 years. So if we take a look at Bill 15 being enacted, in the next, several months, it means that Santé Quebec actually, in fairly short order, is going to be involved in the updating and the renewal of an access program, in the next 3 years. So that gives us a bit of a timetable. I think it's important to note that the success we had with Bill 10 in developing access programs with institutions with English-speaking communities, that this was over 2 years ago. and that those access programs sat in the in tray of the Quebec cabinet for 2 years, waiting for approval. So in effect, 3 years probably is the time you would want to start a renewal anyway. But Richard, I think it may be useful for us to delve further in to the access program and what it is and how it's built, just to sort of understand, everybody can understand that it is the beating heart of legislative guarantees at the local, community, and institutional level.
So what exactly does the access program envisage or contain?
Why don't we take a look at what the ministry instructs institutions to do when they build access programs? And the first step is to actually define the importance of language and service. And so I'm going to actually read what the ministry provides institutions with in terms of a position and an approach. So the ministry states that in the health and social services field, it is recognized that the user's language is an essential tool in ensuring successive clinical interventions. To receive adequate services, an English speaker, like any other person, needs to be listened to, needs to communicate. When a person's health or well-being is at stake, being able to speak in English may become a need, even a necessity. Recognizing this need and responding to it in an appropriate and personalized way are key to a successful clinical intervention. To improve communication and the response to the user's needs during a clinical intervention, the care provider who is responsible for responding to and guiding the user must be familiar with the content of the access program, and the information must be easy to use. So I think none of us would disagree with that statement. It makes a lot of sense in the daily exchanges that occur between anyone using the health system, and the language and the communication aspect of it is obviously a key determinant of a successful outcome. So I think with that, how does the ministry guide the institution to actually develop the access program? First of all, it's clear the access program identifies the manner, the service, and the facility for which there is an obligation in law to make health and social services accessible in English to the English-speaking population, obviously taking into account the institution's human, physical, and financial resources. So the ministry is stating for the access program to achieve potential for success requires the participation and accountability of all directors and management staff. So this includes the clinical directors, the human resource directors, and those responsible for quality assessment, performance, and ethics. They all have major roles to play to ensure that the development, implementation, and the continuous improvement of an effective access program meets, the English-speaking population's needs. So, I mean, it goes up the chain. So it goes up to, the governance level, to what used to be the board of directors, which I guess would be the institution council, to and the chief executive officers. They have to promote the development of an organizational climate that recognizes the importance of language access as a determinant of service quality and safety. So that, those are the components that basically are built around the access program that engage the institution itself. But more importantly for us, that on the collective level, the access program has to include the participation of the English-speaking communities that are being served. So in each region, the institution must engage people from the community in the preparation of the access program. And that's where the Regional Access Committee comes in, Richard. So that's what we have right now that is functioning, and that is what we call the beating heart of legislative guarantees of services in English.
Jim, your organization, the CHSSN, prepared a brief that was submitted to the minister a couple of months ago. Did you make concrete recommendations about the provisions that are included in the new bill? And if so, exactly what are you proposing?
Yes, we submitted a brief to the Parliamentary Commission, and it's very, very simple. We've essentially proposed 3 amendments to the law that would reattach access programs to institutions as a primary obligation of the institution to prepare it, and reattach regional access committees also to the institutions. Very simple. We believe these amendments would fit into the streamlining approach of the new legislation.
And as we talk, we don't know which point the legislation or the bill will be adopted. The bill is currently under review in the Parliamentary Commission, and the MNAs who sit on the commission are reviewing each and every article of the bill. So I think there's a lot we have to keep tabs on and track in the meantime, because we don't know exactly either at what time the bill will be adopted and when it will enter into force, or what the final version of the bill will look like at this point.
That's correct, Richard. And of course, we follow the progress of our amendments going through the Commission's process of study. We know that I think the Commission has about Article 148 or 150 out of 1,100 and whatever. So obviously there's a long road ahead. But we know that the Minister is aware of our brief. We know that our amendments have been registered for study. We also know that the Minister is aware that we have particular concerns, particularly around the Regional Access Committee, because of the loss of representation of English-speaking communities at the institutional level. We also know, Richard, that we've also lost representation on the boards of the institutions that are not designated as bilingual. So effectively, the issue for us right now is that representation of English-speaking communities at the institutional level essentially is being erased by the language of Bill 15 as we speak. And we know that the Minister's own advisory committee has alerted the Minister that these are active concerns of our English-speaking communities. So we'll see where that goes in the clause-by-clause study that's underway now.
Thank you, Jim, for the update and the discussion today on the bill. And we look forward to tracking how things develop and to make sure that the community is actively involved in influencing this process. Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot, Richard. Yet another reform for us to discuss.
And I'm sure there'll be another one in another few years.
Oh, I'm sure there will be.
Thanks.